My sister dumped her 1-month-old baby on my freezing porch at 2 in the morning with a note saying he was my problem now. My parents told me to raise him myself as payback for everything the family had done for me. They thought I was still the quiet, lonely assistant who would silently fix their golden child's disasters like I always had. So, I smiled, brought the baby inside, and got ready to show them exactly who they had underestimated. What happened next left them broke, homeless, and begging for my forgiveness. My name is Cassidy, and by 35 I understood perfectly what it meant to be the family disappointment. Usually, the cost came in fake smiles at holiday dinners and forgotten birthdays. But on a freezing Tuesday in February, that price was left directly on my front porch. Before I continue, tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you have ever had to clean up the toxic damage your family created. It was exactly 2:14 in the morning. Freezing Boston sleet slammed sideways against the windows, covering my driveway in a dangerous layer of black ice. I was still awake reviewing a crisis management strategy for a client when the doorbell rang. Not a polite ring. 3 sharp, desperate presses echoed through my silent house. I was not expecting company. I was expecting a disaster. In my family, those were usually the same thing. I tightened my fleece robe against the cold, unlocked the heavy deadbolt, and pulled open the oak front door. The porch was empty. No headlights lit the street. No engine hummed in the driveway. Only the brutal winter wind sweeping through the bare maple trees in my yard. I stepped outside, shivering, and was about to close the door when a soft, muffled sound froze me in place. A tiny cry. I looked down. Sitting on the icy concrete beside one of my ceramic planters was a luxury leather car seat. Inside, wrapped in a thin fleece blanket already soaked by the freezing rain, was a baby. My nephew Leo. Exactly 1 month old. Tucked beneath the carrier handle was a piece of personalized stationery, the expensive kind, thick and textured, with the gold-embossed initials BH. I did not even need to read the handwriting to know it came from my younger sister Brittany, but I read it anyway beneath the weak yellow glow of the porch light. The note said, "Cass, I cannot do this anymore. I need to find myself. You do not have a husband or children, and your little assistant job gives you plenty of free time. He is your responsibility now. Do not try to find me." Most people would have panicked right there. Most people would have collapsed onto the frozen concrete, crying or calling 911 in complete hysteria. I did not. I had spent my entire life cleaning up Brittany's messes. When she crashed our father's luxury car at 17, I was the one who quietly brought her home. When she quit 3 private colleges, I packed up her dorm rooms and handled the paperwork. I bent down, lifted the carrier, and brought my freezing nephew into the warm foyer. His lips trembled, and his tiny hands were curled into purple fists. "Welcome to the real world, little man," I whispered as I carefully lifted him from the wet blankets. He let out a loud cry that echoed through my living room. I carried him straight to the kitchen, keeping my breathing calm and steady. I did not panic because my whole career revolved around controlling disasters. My family believed I was just a glorified secretary at some small marketing company. They had no idea I was the founder and CEO of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. I spent my days handling the nightmares of Fortune 500 companies: corporate espionage, embezzlement scandals, executive divorces. I dealt with those before my morning coffee. A runaway sister was nothing. As I warmed a bottle of formula I kept in the pantry for friends with babies, my phone vibrated loudly across the granite countertop. It was a text from Brittany's husband, Jamal. Jamal was an African-American data analyst, a kind and brilliant man. My parents had hated him immediately because he did not fit their country club image and because his 6-figure salary was not impressive enough for them. His message read, "Cassidy, is she with you? She emptied our joint accounts. All of them. I cannot find Leo." I looked down at the baby, now drinking quietly from the warm bottle, his small chest rising steadily against my arm. Then I picked up my phone and typed back one sentence. "Come to my house immediately, Jamal, and bring a lawyer." The next morning, the winter sunlight glared harshly off the thick ice coating my front lawn. At exactly 9 my parents' spotless silver Mercedes SUV rolled into the driveway. They did not knock. They never did. They let themselves in using the spare key I had stupidly given them years earlier. "Cassidy, what is this ridiculous text you sent us?" My mother Patricia called out before even removing her fur-lined coat. Patricia valued appearances more than oxygen itself. She walked straight into my kitchen, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. My father Harrison followed behind her, already checking his gold watch impatiently, like my home was just an inconvenient stop in his schedule. Both of them froze when they noticed the portable bassinet sitting in the middle of the living room. Leo slept peacefully inside, wrapped in a fresh, warm blanket. "Where is she?" Harrison demanded, his face turning red. There was no concern in his voice for his grandson, only irritation at how badly this situation disrupted his plans. I stayed calm and handed them the gold-embossed note Brittany had left in the car seat. "She left him on my porch at 2 in the morning during a freezing rainstorm," I said flatly. "She is gone." Patricia snatched the note from my hand. I watched her eyes move across the elegant handwriting while her manicured nails tapped nervously against the paper. I waited for outrage. I waited for her to condemn the daughter she had spoiled for 30 years. I waited for her to rush to the bassinet and check the baby who had nearly frozen to death. Instead, Patricia sighed dramatically, folded the note, and slipped it into her expensive handbag. "Well," Patricia said smoothly as she walked past the baby toward my espresso machine. "She is clearly dealing with postpartum depression. The poor girl is exhausted. Jamal has been completely useless. He works all the time and ignores her emotional needs. She just needs a relaxing retreat to clear her mind." I stared at her in disbelief. The audacity drained the air from the room. "She abandoned an infant in a snowstorm," I said quietly. That is felony child endangerment, not an excuse for a spa vacation." Harrison stepped forward, his jaw tightening into the same intimidating expression he used on his employees. "Watch your tone, Cassidy," he snapped. "Your sister is in a very fragile state right now. You are the older sister. You've always been alone anyway. You work that tiny assistant job from home, so you have plenty of free time. You can take care of the boy until she finds herself again." I looked at him, honestly amazed by the sheer arrogance. "You want me to raise her child?" I asked. "Oh, stop being dramatic," Patricia scoffed, taking a delicate sip of espresso. "It is the least you can do for this family. We paid for your braces and that useless liberal arts degree. We always knew you would never give us grandchildren because you refused to settle down. You should see this as a blessing. Besides, you owe us. You owe us for not turning out perfect like Brittany." There it was. The truth spoken openly in my own kitchen. In their eyes, I was nothing more than the family workhorse, the one expected to carry the crushing burden of the golden child's failures while staying invisible and grateful for whatever scraps of attention they offered. 5 years earlier, those words would have made me cry. 10 years earlier, they would have made me scream about how unfair everything was. But now, all I felt was cold clarity. I had no desire to argue or defend myself anymore. I just smiled. A detached, icy smile that made Harrison shift uncomfortably in his Italian loafers. "Fine," I said softly, holding his stare until he finally looked away. Then I turned and walked toward my office. I stepped inside and quietly closed the heavy French doors behind me. To my family, this room was just a sad little workspace where I answered emails for some middle manager. In reality, it was the command center of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations, 3 high-resolution monitors sat across my mahogany desk, and steel filing cabinets with biometric locks lined the walls. I ignored my workstation and walked straight to the industrial laser printer in the corner. Waiting there was a fresh stack of legal documents. At 4 hours that morning, while Leo finally slept, I had called my firm's top family lawyer and paid an emergency retainer larger than my father's yearly country club fees to prepare those documents immediately. They were airtight. I picked up the top page and skimmed it. It was a formal waiver of guardianship and a complete transfer of temporary medical and legal authority. Under Massachusetts law, abandoned infants usually became the responsibility of the closest relatives. My parents, as the maternal grandparents, had automatic priority. These documents legally removed that priority and transferred all temporary authority directly to me because they refused to take custody. I grabbed my silver fountain pen and walked back into the kitchen. Patricia was admiring herself in the reflection of my oven door while adjusting her pearl earrings. Harrison was glued to his phone, already mentally back on the golf course. Neither had bothered to walk 10 feet to check on their sleeping grandson. I placed the thick stack of papers onto the granite island with a soft thud and set the pen on top. "What is this?" Harrison asked suspiciously. "A hospital bill? Because I am not paying for diapers or formula. That is your responsibility now." I kept my expression neutral. "No, Dad," I said calmly. "It is just a temporary medical authorization and guardianship waiver. Since you both agreed I should take care of Leo while Brittany is away at her retreat, I need your signatures." Patricia rolled her eyes. "Why would we need to sign anything? Just watch the boy, Cassidy. It is not complicated." "It actually is complicated, Mother," I replied smoothly, copying her condescending tone. "If Leo gets sick or needs emergency treatment, the hospital cannot let me approve anything because I am only his aunt. Since Brittany is missing and you are the legal next of kin, the state requires written consent. Unless, of course, you want hospitals calling you at 3 a.m. in the morning every time he gets a fever. Or I can always have child services bring him directly to your house during a medical emergency." The thought of late-night phone calls and government vehicles in their pristine driveway worked perfectly. Harrison's suspicion disappeared, replaced instantly by selfish panic. He hated inconvenience more than anything. "Give me the pen," Harrison snapped. He grabbed it and flipped directly to the final page without reading a single paragraph. He signed immediately, desperate to separate himself from the baby sleeping in my living room. Then he slid the papers toward Patricia. "Sign it," he ordered. "We have brunch with the Hendersons in 45 minutes, and I am not letting Brittany's little episode ruin my Sunday." Patricia signed without even glancing down. "There," she said, dropping the pen onto the counter. "Done. You have permission to take him to the doctor. Do not contact us unless it is life or death. And even then, text first." I picked up the papers and looked at their signatures in bold black ink. They had just legally surrendered their grandson. They had no idea they had willingly signed away their final control over me and this child. "We are leaving," Harrison announced as he buttoned his expensive coat. "Keep the boy quiet, and if anyone asks, Brittany is on a luxury retreat. We do not need gossip spreading about this family." I watched them walk out the front door without looking back at the bassinet once. The heavy oak door closed behind them, and silence filled the house. I looked down at the signed waiver in my hand and finally smiled for real. The trap had closed, and they had locked themselves inside it. The moment the taillights of their Mercedes vanished down the frozen street, I got to work immediately. I carefully folded the signed guardianship waiver and locked it inside the fireproof safe hidden beneath my desk. Then I checked on Leo one more time. He was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that his own grandparents had just thrown him away like unwanted junk mail. I gently adjusted the fleece blanket around his tiny shoulders and felt a fierce, unfamiliar wave of protectiveness rise inside my chest. I was not going to let my family ruin this boy the same way they had tried to ruin me. I sat down at my mahogany desk, powered on all 3 monitors, and initiated a secure, encrypted conference call. It was time to unleash the full force of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. Within 30 seconds, 3 of my top executives joined the call. Jonathan, my ruthless head legal counsel. David, my senior forensic financial analyst who could trace a single missing dollar through a maze of offshore shell companies. And Rachel, my media containment specialist. They thought they were waking up on a Sunday morning to manage another Fortune 500 corporate disaster. None of them realized the target was my own sister. "Good morning, team," I said, keeping my voice cold and professional. "We have a domestic code red. The subject is Brittany Harrison. I need a full digital and financial sweep covering the last 48 hours. Pull her phone records, track her credit card activity, and get the local traffic camera footage from around my neighborhood starting at 2 this morning. I want to know where she went, who she is with, and what vehicle she is driving." Jonathan spoke first, the fast clacking of his mechanical keyboard echoing through the headset. "Consider it done, Cassidy. We are already running the plates on her leased SUV. Do we need to alert authorities about a missing person?" "Absolutely not," I replied instantly. "She is not missing. She is running. Just figure out what she is running from." The line went silent for nearly 10 minutes while my team worked. This was exactly what I paid them absurd amounts of money to do. They were the best fixers on the East Coast. While they dug through the digital dirt, I began drafting a detailed timeline of events and preparing the paperwork needed to secure temporary custody of Leo through the courts first thing Monday morning. Suddenly, David cleared his throat over the speaker. "Cassidy," he said, his normally calm voice filled with shock. "I just bypassed the security protocols on her banking apps. You need to see this right now. I'm pushing the screen share to your main monitor." A giant spreadsheet appeared on my center screen. It was a live feed of Brittany and Jamal's joint accounts. My eyes moved across the glowing red numbers and my blood ran cold. I expected a few maxed-out cards from another one of her luxury shopping binges. I did not expect complete financial annihilation. Over the last 72 hours, Brittany had drained every joint savings account, investment portfolio, and emergency fund she shared with Jamal. The money had not been withdrawn slowly. It had been wired out in massive transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "How much?" I asked quietly, leaning toward the monitor. $250,000, David answered grimly. "She completely liquidated him. And that isn't all. She also took out a large personal loan against his vehicle and maxed out 3 separate credit cards under his name. This was not a stressed mother running away. This was premeditated grand larceny and federal wire fraud." I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the numbers. My parents' story about postpartum depression and emotional exhaustion collapsed instantly. Brittany was not an overwhelmed mother looking for peace. She was a calculated thief who robbed her husband blind and abandoned her newborn baby in freezing weather so she could disappear without extra baggage. Jonathan spoke again, his legal brain already moving ahead. "Cassidy, if Jamal reports this, she is looking at serious federal charges. We need to secure every piece of evidence before she realizes we are tracking her and wipes the trail." "Download everything," I ordered coldly. "The wire confirmations, IP addresses, timestamps, all of it. Put it onto a hard drive. We are handing this to the authorities on a silver platter." Right as I finished speaking, the heavy doorbell rang twice through the house. I checked the security feed on my third monitor. Standing on my icy porch, looking exhausted and terrified, was Jamal. In his hands was a thick manila folder, and behind him a Boston police cruiser sat idling quietly at the curb. The first real move on the board had officially begun. I watched Jamal through the high-definition security feed for several seconds. He was shivering in a thin wool coat, shoulders tight against the brutal wind. Beside him stood a Boston police officer with a stern expression and one hand resting near his utility belt. I locked my computer screens immediately, left my office, and headed toward the front door. When I opened the heavy oak door, Jamal looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot, and the dark circles beneath them showed he had not slept all night. We had never been close. My parents made sure of that. They constantly criticized him, mocked his successful career, and made family gatherings so unbearable that he eventually stopped coming entirely. Because I was the family outcast, they painted me as unstable and bitter to everyone they knew. Naturally, Jamal had kept his distance from me too. We were two outsiders carefully separated by my parents' lies and manipulation. "Cassidy," Jamal said, his voice breaking slightly. "Where is he? Where's my son?" Before I could answer, the police officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we received a report involving a missing infant and stolen funds. Mr. Davis believes his wife Brittany Harrison may have brought the child to this residence." I did not react. My professional instincts took over instantly. "Officer, please come inside out of the cold," I said calmly, stepping aside. "Both of you. My sister is not here, but my nephew is safe." The relief that hit Jamal was so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. He rushed past the officer and into the foyer. I led them into the living room where the bassinet still sat in the middle of the rug. The second Jamal saw Leo asleep beneath the warm blanket, he collapsed onto his knees on the hardwood floor. His shaking hands reached out and gently touched the baby's cheek like he needed proof he was real. "Thank God," Jamal whispered, a single tear sliding down his face. "Thank God you're okay." The officer pulled out a small black notepad. "So the child was left here at your home. Did your sister explain where she was going, or when she would return?" I shook my head and handed him the gold-embossed note Brittany had left in the carrier. "I found him on my porch at 2 this morning during the sleet storm. She left this note and disappeared. She never called and never even knocked. The only reason I found him was because I was still awake working when I heard him crying outside." The officer read the note, his professional expression slipping into visible disgust. "She left a 1-month-old infant outside in freezing weather?" "Yes," I answered steadily. "And this morning, my parents came here and refused to take responsibility for him. They claimed Brittany just needed a wellness retreat, but they signed these legal documents." I retrieved a copy of the guardianship waiver from the kitchen island and handed it to him. "It temporarily transfers medical and caretaking authority to me, signed by the maternal grandparents. I was already planning to file for emergency custody through family court tomorrow morning." Jamal slowly stood up from beside the bassinet and turned toward me. The tension between us thickened instantly. His expression carried both gratitude and suspicion. "You were going to file for custody?" he asked carefully. "Cassidy, I'm his father. He belongs with me, not you or your parents." I met his eyes directly, dropping the polite mask entirely. "Jamal, we both know my family has treated you horribly since the moment you met Brittany, and I know they've spent years feeding you lies about me. But listen carefully. I am not your enemy. I didn't file for custody to take him away from you. I did it to build a legal wall so my parents cannot use him as leverage once they realize how big the situation really is." Jamal frowned deeply and crossed his arms. "What do you mean by how big this is? I already told the police she emptied our accounts. It's awful, but it's just money." I took a slow breath. "It's much worse than money, Jamal. I need you to ask the officer to give us a few minutes alone. Then I need to show you what's on my computer. I have proof of what Brittany actually did, and it's going to change everything." Jamal turned toward the officer. "Officer, could you give us 5 minutes in private?" he asked tightly. "I need to see this evidence before making any formal statement." The officer nodded slowly. "I'll wait outside in the cruiser. Take your time, but do not alter or delete anything on that computer." The front door shut behind him, leaving only the quiet breathing of the baby filling the house. "Follow me," I said, leading Jamal down the hallway into my office. I opened the French doors and gestured toward the leather chair across from my desk. He sat down heavily and rubbed both hands over his face. "Before I show you this, understand that my team is actively tracking her digital footprint," I explained as I reactivated the monitors. "But first, tell me how she managed to move $250,000 without triggering fraud alerts or requiring your authorization." Jamal let out a bitter laugh. "She didn't just steal the money, Cassidy. She set me up. 2 days ago, while I was at work, she went to the police and filed a domestic disturbance report. She requested an emergency restraining order and claimed I had become violent toward her and the baby. She told them I was planning to drain our accounts and flee the state. Every word was a lie, but she played the role perfectly. Because of that report, the bank gave her emergency access to our joint funds under a domestic abuse exemption. She locked me out of my own life legally. Even for someone in my profession, the manipulation was breathtaking." I stared at him, piecing together the cruelty of my sister's plan. "She didn't just rob you," I said quietly. "She framed you for abuse to justify the theft, and she knew my parents would believe it instantly because they've always looked down on you." Jamal nodded grimly. "I spent the entire night being detained and questioned while she wired my life savings offshore. By the time my lawyer proved I was at work during the supposed incident, she was already gone. She stole the money, the SUV, and for a terrifying stretch of time, I believed she had taken my son too. I truly thought I would never lay eyes on him again." I slowly rotated the main monitor toward Jamal. "You need to prepare yourself," I warned quietly. "What you are about to see is going to hurt far more than the missing money ever could." I clicked the security footage file my team had recovered from my porch camera system. The screen flickered, revealing grainy black and white infrared footage from 2:14 a.m. We watched in complete silence as Brittany's leased luxury SUV rolled into frame. Heavy sleet hammered the driveway in relentless waves. The driver's side door opened and Brittany stepped out. She wore her expensive designer winter coat with the hood pulled tightly over her head against the freezing storm. She walked around to the back seat and casually lifted out the infant carrier holding her 1-month-old son. She did not cradle him carefully. She carried the seat one-handed as she marched briskly up my icy driveway. Jamal leaned closer to the screen, his breathing uneven. Brittany walked directly onto the porch, dropped the carrier carelessly onto the frozen concrete, and shoved the envelope beneath the plastic handle. She never checked whether he was warm enough. She never hesitated. She never cried. She simply turned around, climbed back into her heated SUV, and disappeared into the darkness without looking back even once. The footage froze on the image of her taillights vanishing down the street. Jamal sat motionless. The heartbreak in his expression slowly transformed into something colder and far more dangerous. It hardened into pure fury. "She threw him away," Jamal whispered, his voice trembling with terrifying restraint. "She threw our son away like garbage just so she could spend my money." I reached forward and closed the laptop softly. "Yes," I answered calmly. "And my parents are protecting her. They already signed away their rights this morning. So now the real question is this: what exactly are we going to do about it?" "We are going to destroy her," Jamal said. I nodded once, allowing the weight of his words to settle heavily across the room. Destroying my sister was no longer an emotional impulse. It had officially become a strategic objective. "Good," I replied evenly. "Then we need to handle this carefully. No emotional outbursts. No reckless decisions. Brittany believes she already won. She thinks you are trapped by her false abuse allegations, and she thinks I am still the obedient, invisible older sister who will quietly raise her child while my parents clean up her mess." I folded my hands together. "We let them keep believing that. right up until the moment the trap closes. Jamal dragged a shaky hand across his face. I cannot go back to the house right now, Cassidy. The police sealed it temporarily because of her fake domestic violence claim. And honestly, even if they had not, I could not stand being inside the place where she planned all of this. I had already prepared for that problem. You are not going anywhere, I told him firmly. You are staying here. The guest room is yours for as long as you need it. Leo needs his father, and I need someone I can trust beside me. We are going to secure this house, combine our resources, and build a legal case so devastating that neither Brittany nor my parents will recover from it. Jamal looked at me differently then. Years of forced distance and awkward family manipulation dissolved instantly. Thank you, Cassidy, he said quietly. I mean that. That very afternoon, Jamal officially moved into my guest room carrying nothing but a small duffel bag his attorney had managed to retrieve for him. The adjustment was surprisingly natural. For the first time in my life, I was no longer handling my family's toxic fallout completely alone. Very quickly, we developed a smooth, almost military-like routine as co-parents. When Leo cried at 3 in the morning, Jamal was already warming a bottle while I changed diapers. When Jamal spent hours untangling Brittany's financial crimes with his legal team, I sat in my office rocking Leo gently while directing my company operations. Neither of us complained about exhaustion. There was no point. Shared betrayal created a stronger bond than blood ever had. During the daytime, my house transformed into a fully operational command center. I hired Vanguard's top private security contractors to reinforce the property immediately. Hidden surveillance cameras were installed. Exterior doors were upgraded. An encrypted evidence server was built in the basement to store the growing mountain of digital proof. Meanwhile, my forensic financial investigator worked directly with Jamal's attorneys to trace every stolen dollar. Together, they constructed a crystal-clear trail of wire fraud, identity theft, and international money laundering. At the same time, I focused entirely on my parents. I knew Patricia and Harrison better than anyone alive, which meant I knew exactly how they would try to manipulate public perception once the scandal spread. Rachel, my media containment specialist, began archiving every text message, email, and social media post they made regarding the situation. As days slowly became weeks, Leo started thriving. The fragile infant we rescued from my freezing porch transformed into a healthy, smiling baby who recognized his father's voice and wrapped his tiny hand around my finger with surprising strength. Every time Leo laughed, the fire in Jamal's eyes grew stronger. He was patient, loving, and completely devoted to his son, everything my family falsely claimed he could never be. One evening, after Leo had fallen asleep, Jamal entered my office while I reviewed the finalized temporary custody orders the court quietly approved, thanks to the waiver my parents blindly signed. He placed a thick stack of bank records onto my desk. My attorneys confirmed everything, he said. The offshore accounts are frozen. Federal agents flagged her passport, and she just attempted to use a canceled credit card at a luxury resort in Cabo. She is running out of money. I smiled slightly. Perfect, I replied. Soon she will come crawling back, and when she does, we will be ready. But while we waited for Brittany to hit rock bottom, my parents launched their own counterattack. They quickly realized they could not continue maintaining appearances at the Belmont Country Club without producing either Brittany or the baby. Patricia refused to allow gossip to control the narrative surrounding her perfect family. If she could not hide the truth, she intended to rewrite it entirely. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was feeding Leo mashed peas in the kitchen when Rachel called through the secure line. Cassidy, she said flatly, you need to log into your alternate social account immediately. Your mother just posted something explosive, and it is spreading fast among the country club crowd. I handed the spoon to Jamal, grabbed my tablet, and opened Patricia's profile. There it was. A dramatic, emotional post accompanied by a carefully staged selfie of my mother clutching a baby blanket with tears in her eyes. It was psychological manipulation at its finest. According to Patricia's fabricated story, Brittany was currently staying at a private healing retreat while courageously battling severe postpartum depression. Then came the attack against me. Patricia claimed I had manipulated Brittany's fragile emotional state and weaponized predatory lawyers to steal baby Leo away from his loving mother. She literally described me as a bitter, jealous spinster. She told hundreds of wealthy followers that I was trying to fill the emptiness of my lonely, childless life by taking my sister's baby. The comments were vicious. Friends, relatives, and country club associates flooded the post with sympathy for Brittany and disgust toward me. They called me unstable, bitter, and pathetic. Some accused me of kidnapping. Not one person mentioned Jamal. His existence as Leo's father had been completely erased. Jamal read the post over my shoulder, his entire body tightening with rage. "I am driving there right now," he growled. "I am going to walk straight into their country club and tell everyone exactly what Brittany did." I immediately grabbed his arm. "No, you are not," I said calmly. "You are going to sit down and finish feeding your son." He stared at me in disbelief. "Cassidy, they are destroying your reputation publicly. They are calling you a jealous kidnapper." "How are you this calm?" I looked back down at the screen. "Because I work in crisis public relations," I explained evenly. "And the first rule of a smear campaign is simple. Never interrupt your enemy while they are making a catastrophic legal mistake." I took screenshots of every post and every comment. "What Patricia is doing is not merely cruel," I continued. "It is textbook defamation. She is knowingly publishing false statements that directly damage my personal and professional reputation." I forwarded everything to my attorneys. Every like, comment, and share increases the financial damages she will owe me when I sue her. Over the following 2 weeks, my parents intensified the campaign. Harrison posted dramatic messages about betrayal and selfish family members on his business networking accounts. Patricia spread rumors throughout private family group chats claiming I refused to let them see their grandson. Rachel archived every single thing, every timestamp, every screenshot, every interaction. They believed they were isolating me the same way they had throughout my childhood. What they failed to understand was that I controlled public narratives professionally. They were unknowingly walking deeper into the very trap that would eventually destroy them. 3 weeks after Brittany disappeared, the atmosphere inside my house settled into a tense silence. That morning, my investigators informed me that Brittany's offshore accounts had officially been frozen by federal authorities. Her passport had been flagged. She was out of money, which meant she would inevitably contact the people who had enabled her entire life. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang. My father's name flashed across the screen. I answered immediately and placed the call on speaker so Jamal could hear everything. "Hello, Dad," I said politely. "Cassidy," Harrison barked, skipping any greeting entirely. "I need you to wire $50,000 into my account immediately. I am sending you the routing information right now." His voice was strained beneath the forced authority. I exchanged a glance with Jamal. $50,000? I repeated slowly. "That sounds serious. Did Mother overspend at another charity gala?" "Do not get smart with me," Harrison snapped. "This concerns your sister. We believe her wellness retreat may be fraudulent and she could be in danger overseas. I am hiring a private investigator to bring her home safely. My assets are temporarily tied up, so you need to send the money immediately. You have savings from your little assistant job." It was almost pathetic. My team already knew exactly where Brittany was. She was stranded at a luxury resort in Cabo, desperately trying to use canceled credit cards. She had obviously called my father begging for money. And because Harrison was secretly drowning in debt himself, he was trying to squeeze the money out of the daughter he despised in order to save the daughter he worshipped. "I am not funding Brittany's crimes," I said coldly. "She made her choices." Silence filled the line. Then Harrison unleashed the threat he had used against me my entire life. "If you do not transfer that money by 5 o'clock," he hissed, "I will remove you completely from the family will. I will transfer the Belmont estate directly to Brittany. You will never receive a single cent from this family." Jamal stared at me in horror. But instead of feeling hurt, I felt triumphant. I actually laughed. "Are you laughing at me?" Harrison shouted furiously. "Yes," I answered calmly. "Please call your lawyer. Transfer everything to Brittany. In fact, before you do, I strongly recommend reading the deed to your house very carefully. Have a wonderful afternoon." I ended the call before he could respond. Jamal blinked at me. "Cassidy, why would you encourage him to give away a $3 million mansion?" I smiled and opened my bottom desk drawer, pulling out a sealed manila envelope. "They lost that mansion to foreclosure 3 years ago," I explained. "They thought an investment company rescued them privately to avoid public embarrassment." I slid the documents toward him. "Vanguard uses anonymous shell corporations for real estate acquisitions. I purchased their debt myself." Jamal stared at me speechlessly. "They are not paying the bank a mortgage anymore," I finished softly. "They have been paying rent to me this entire time." Months passed peacefully after that. Spring arrived in Boston, melting away the winter ice. Inside my secured home, our unconventional little family slowly became something real. Leo was now a healthy 5-month-old baby full of laughter and life, and somewhere along the way, he completely stole both of our hearts. She stabbed her finger toward the screen, but before she could press the final digit, a calm voice cut through the chaos from the sidewalk behind them. "That won't be necessary." Every head on the porch snapped toward the street. 2 black SUVs had silently pulled up to the curb. The first man to step out wore a charcoal suit beneath a dark federal windbreaker. The bright gold letters across his chest made Patricia physically recoil. FBI. 3 more agents followed behind him alongside 2 uniformed Boston police officers. Brittany's face drained of every remaining trace of color. The lead agent walked slowly up the driveway holding a thin tablet in one hand. His expression was completely emotionless. "Brittany Harrison?" he asked evenly. Brittany immediately straightened her posture, trying desperately to recover her performance. "Yes," she answered shakily, lowering the phone. "Thank God you're here. My sister and ex-husband kidnapped my baby and you are under federal investigation for wire fraud, identity theft, financial theft exceeding $250,000, and unlawful international transfer of stolen assets." The agent interrupted coldly. The entire porch went silent. Patricia blinked rapidly. Harrison looked like someone had punched him directly in the throat. Brittany stared at the agent in disbelief. "What?" she whispered. The agent continued without emotion. "We also have evidence of filing a false domestic violence report, falsifying police statements, fraudulent financial access under emergency abuse exemptions, and felony child abandonment." Brittany's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "No," she stammered weakly. "No, that's not possible. My parents told me everything was handled." That sentence hit Harrison like a bullet. "Brittany," he hissed sharply, but it was too late. The agent glanced down at the tablet. "Actually, Ms. Harrison, your parents' communications were extremely helpful to the investigation." My mother turned toward me slowly. Her expression shifted from panic to dawning horror. "You," Patricia whispered. I folded my arms calmly. "You really should have read the documents before signing them," I replied. The FBI agent stepped forward. "Ma'am, place your hands behind your back." Brittany stumbled backward. "This is insane!" she screamed suddenly. "Cassidy set me up. Jamal manipulated all of this. They stole my baby. Jamal finally spoke again, his voice quiet and lethal. No, Brittany, he said. You abandoned your son on a frozen concrete porch so you could run away with stolen money. The neighbors had started gathering outside now. Curtains twitched open across the street. Phones were already recording. Patricia noticed it immediately. And for the first time in her entire life, the woman who worshipped appearances realized there was absolutely no controlling the narrative anymore. Harrison, do something, she whispered frantically. But Harrison looked broken, because deep down, he finally understood the truth. His golden child had detonated their entire lives. The agent moved to cuff Brittany. She jerked violently away. You can't arrest me, she shrieked. I'm a mother. You abandoned a 1-month-old infant in freezing weather, the officer replied flatly. You lost the right to use that defense. Patricia suddenly lunged toward the agents. This is a misunderstanding, she cried desperately. My daughter was emotionally unstable. She needed help. The second FBI agent turned toward her calmly. Mrs. Harrison, obstruction of a federal investigation is also a criminal offense. I strongly advise you to step back. That finally silenced her. Brittany's composure completely shattered. She began sobbing hysterically as the agent secured handcuffs around her wrists. Harrison! She screamed. Dad, don't let them take me! But Harrison didn't move, because at that exact moment, another vehicle slowly turned onto the street, a white foreclosure services van. It stopped directly in front of my parents' mansion photographs displayed on the magnetic paperwork attached to the side panel. Patricia stared at it in confusion. I smiled faintly. Perfect timing, I said. Harrison looked at me sharply. What did you do? He demanded. I calmly reached into the folder beside my front door and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Since you failed to make your mortgage payments for the last 6 consecutive months, I explained smoothly, the final foreclosure order was approved this morning. Patricia's knees nearly buckled. No, she whispered. I handed Harrison the paperwork. You should have read your contracts more carefully, too. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Then he saw the ownership records. Vanguard Property Holdings, my shell company. His eyes snapped up to mine in absolute disbelief. You, he breathed. Yes, I answered calmly. You've been paying me rent for 3 years. The silence that followed was devastating. Everything they had built their identities around, the mansion, the status, the control, the illusion of superiority, collapsed in a single moment right there on my porch. Brittany crying in handcuffs, federal agents surrounding the family, neighbors recording everything, and the daughter they spent decades humiliating standing calmly at the center of it all. Patricia finally broke. She burst into tears, real tears this time, not the polished country club performance, not the manipulative, dramatic sobbing she used to weaponize sympathy. These were the ugly tears of a woman realizing she had lost absolutely everything. Cassidy, she whispered weakly. Please. But I felt nothing. No rage, no satisfaction, just clarity. Because the little girl who spent her entire childhood begging these people to love her was gone. The only thing standing in front of them now was the woman they created through years of cruelty, neglect, and humiliation. And she no longer needed anything from them. Behind me, Leo began giggling happily from the living room. The sound instantly cut through the tension like sunlight. Jamal looked back toward the house instinctively, smiling softly. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I understood something important. Family was not blood. Family was the people who protected you when it mattered most. The FBI vehicles finally pulled away with Brittany in the back seat. The foreclosure team headed toward my parents' estate. And Harrison stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the legal papers that proved he no longer owned the house he worshipped more than his children. Patricia looked utterly shattered. "Where are we supposed to go?" she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I stepped backward into my house. "That," I said calmly, "sounds like your burden now." And I closed the door. Harrison extended one dramatic hand toward the center of the ballroom where Brittany stood trembling in her pale silk dress. "So tonight," he declared proudly, "in front of the people who matter most to this family, I am asking my eldest daughter to finally do the right thing. Cassidy, bring Leo home to his mother." A wave of approving applause swept through the ballroom. Country club wives nodded solemnly. Several relatives looked at me with open disgust. Someone near the back muttered, "About time." My father smiled victoriously. He thought he had already won. I slowly glanced around the room, taking in every crystal chandelier, every smug face, every relative who had spent decades watching me be humiliated in silence. Then I smiled. Not nervously, not defensively, strategically. I stepped away from Jamal and walked calmly toward the center aisle. The sharp echo of my heels against the marble floor sliced through the applause until the entire ballroom fell quiet again. Harrison's confident expression flickered for the first time. "Thank you, Dad," I said smoothly, stopping beneath the chandelier light. "That was a beautiful speech. Truly inspiring. You almost convinced me myself." A few awkward chuckles rippled through the crowd. But since tonight is apparently about truth, healing, and restoring the proper order of the family, I slowly pulled a small black remote from my emerald blazer pocket. I thought it might be helpful if everyone had access to the complete story. Harrison's smile vanished instantly. "What are you doing?" Patricia hissed. I pressed the button. Behind the raised dais, the massive projector screen my father had arranged for a sentimental family slideshow suddenly flickered to life. But instead of spring flowers and family portraits, the ballroom filled with grainy black and white security footage. 2:14 a.m. Freezing sleet hammered across the screen. Brittany's luxury SUV rolled into my driveway. A collective murmur swept through the crowd. "No," Brittany whispered. The footage continued. Everyone watched in horrified silence as Brittany stepped out of the vehicle, removed the infant car seat with one careless hand, marched to my porch, dropped the baby onto freezing concrete, shoved the envelope beneath the handle, and walked away, without once looking back. The ballroom went dead silent. No music, no whispers, nothing. Only the soft hiss of the projector. The final frame froze on the image of her taillights disappearing into the storm. A champagne glass shattered somewhere near the back of the room. My Aunt Beatrice slowly lowered her hand from her mouth, staring at Brittany in complete disbelief. "That," one of the country club women whispered shakily. "That baby was outside alone?" Brittany's face had drained completely of color. Harrison lunged toward the projector table. "Turn that off immediately." I pressed another button. The next slide appeared. Bank records, wire transfers, offshore account summaries, highlighted totals. $250,000 transferred to the Cayman Islands. Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Then came the police report Brittany had filed falsely accusing Jamal of domestic violence. Then the federal fraud investigation notice. Then the family court ruling. Then the restraining order. Then finally, the termination of parental rights, stamped with the raised seal of the Massachusetts Family Court. The room exploded into chaos. Oh my God. She lied to all of us? She abandoned her child? Federal fraud? Patricia staggered backward into a chair. Harrison's face turned a frightening shade of purple. "You manipulated this," he shouted desperately. "This is fabricated. This is—" "It's all authenticated evidence," Jamal interrupted calmly as he stepped beside me, "including the sworn statements from federal investigators and family court officials." Brittany suddenly snapped. "You think you're innocent?" She screamed at Jamal. You ruined my life. Both of you ruined everything. No, Brittany, I said quietly. You ruined your own life the moment you left your son to freeze on my porch. Her breathing became ragged, desperate, cornered. And then, in the worst possible moment for her, she made the fatal mistake. She pointed directly at me and screamed loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. I should have left that stupid baby somewhere farther away. None of this would have happened if she hadn't heard him crying. The silence afterward was nuclear. Every single person in the ballroom froze. Brittany herself seemed to realize what she had just admitted. Too late. Near the entrance of the ballroom, a slow, deliberate clap echoed through the stunned crowd. Everyone turned. 2 federal agents stood in the doorway beside uniformed Boston police officers. Rachel stepped in behind them, holding a tablet. One of the agents opened a leather credential wallet. "Brittany Harrison," he announced clearly, "you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, financial theft, falsifying police reports, and child endangerment." Brittany stumbled backward. No, wait." The agents moved forward. Patricia burst into hysterical sobs. Harrison tried to step between them. "You cannot arrest my daughter in front of all these people." The lead agent didn't even blink. "Sir, sit down before you obstruct a federal investigation." The ballroom watched in absolute shock as Brittany was handcuffed beneath the crystal chandeliers she had once loved showing off on social media. Her mascara streaked down her face, her silk dress wrinkled beneath the agent's grip. Her entire carefully crafted victim narrative collapsed in real time. And for the first time in her life, no one came to save her. As the officers escorted Brittany toward the exit, she twisted violently to look back at our parents. "Do something!" she screamed. But Harrison stood frozen, because deep down, he finally understood something devastating. His empire was gone. The socialites surrounding him weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him with disgust. Whispers spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Foreclosure. Fraud. They lied to everyone. That poor baby. Patricia buried her face in her hands. The mighty Belmont dynasty had just died in public, and everyone in the room had witnessed the funeral. Harrison grandly gestured towards Brittany, who was now softly weeping on her mother's shoulder, acting out her tragic victim role to perfection. Cassidy Harrison's tone shifted from a sympathetic patriarch to a stern, unyielding dictator. "I stand before our entire family and our most trusted friends to demand you do the right thing. Immediately drop this absurd legal charade. Release the frivolous restraining orders. Give Leo back to his rightful, loving mother where he truly belongs. If you do this tonight, right here, right now, we will generously forgive your deeply misguided actions. We will welcome you back into the fold, but you must surrender the child." A low buzz of approval erupted in the ballroom. The aunts and uncles nodded vigorously. The country club elites looked at me with undisguised contempt, fully buying into my father's masterful manipulation. They eagerly awaited the subservient older sister to hang her head in shame, apologize for her alleged jealousy, and comply with her father's decree. Brittany peeked from behind Patricia's shoulder. Her fake tears stopped. A smug smirk tugged at her lips. She believed peer pressure and social humiliation had finally cornered me. I looked at my father on the dais, then at the sea of judgmental faces, expecting total surrender. I turned my head slightly and made direct eye contact with the audiovisual technician standing near the back wall. I gave him a single, deliberate nod. The moment I secretly gave the signal, the crystal chandeliers illuminating the ballroom instantly went dark. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the room plunged into shadow. The string quartet halted their music with a harsh scrape of boughs. Before anyone could panic, a massive projector screen hummed to life, descending from the ceiling directly behind the raised dais where my father stood. Harrison blinked blindly into the sudden darkness, his carefully crafted benevolent patriarch persona slipping into genuine annoyance. "What is the meaning of this?" He barked aggressively into the microphone, waving his free hand angrily toward the back of the massive room. "Turn the lights back on this instant. We are in the middle of a very important family announcement." I did not wait for the lights to return. I let go of Jamal's arm and walked purposefully toward the front. The sharp clicking of my designer stilettos echoed loudly in the tense silence. I climbed the short steps to the dais, approaching my father with absolute, unshakable confidence. He glared at me, his eyes widening in confusion as I stepped directly into his personal space. I did not ask for his permission. I simply reached out and took the microphone right out of his hand. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting through the sound system. "My father has just painted a moving portrait of our family dynamics. He told a heartbreaking story about a devoted mother and a jealous older sister wanting to steal a life she could never build." "It was a beautiful speech, Dad. But there is a significant problem with your fabricated narrative. It relies entirely on the assumption that I am a powerless, financially dependent assistant who needs your social approval to survive." I pressed a small wireless remote hidden in the palm of my right hand. The massive screen behind me flashed brilliantly to life, bathing the entire ballroom in a stark, icy blue light. Displayed in massive, bold letters was the sleek, authoritative corporate brand logo of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. Underneath the iconic logo, my professional headshot appeared next to my official corporate leadership title. "For the past 10 long years," I continued, pacing slowly across the stage so everyone could see my face clearly, "my parents told you that I work from my living room, answering emails for a local marketing agency. They told you I was a failure because it made it much easier to elevate Brittany as the flawless golden child. But that was a convenient, pathetic lie. My name is Cassidy, and I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations." The reaction was instantaneous and satisfying. The Belmont Country Club was not filled with ordinary people. It was packed with wealthy business owners, corporate executives, and high-powered politicians. They all recognized the Vanguard name immediately. Vanguard was the notoriously ruthless firm that handled massive corporate espionage cases, embezzlement scandals, and the messy divorces of the ultra-rich. A loud collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. I watched as the chief executive officer of a major tech firm dropped his jaw, whispering my name to his wife in absolute disbelief. He personally paid my firm a massive retainer last year to save his company from a catastrophic data breach. Harrison stared at the massive screen, his face turning an unhealthy, ashen shade of gray. The brutal reality of my wealth and immense corporate power was hitting him like a physical blow to the chest. He reached out frantically, trying to grab the microphone back from me. "Cassidy, stop this ridiculous, disrespectful nonsense right now," he hissed aggressively through his gritted teeth. "You are completely embarrassing this entire family in public." Before his hand could even touch the microphone, Jamal stepped smoothly right up onto the dais. He did not say a single word. He just stood firmly between my father and me, a silent, immovable wall of absolute protection. Harrison froze instantly, remembering the brutal reality of the active restraining order and Jamal's overwhelming financial leverage over Brittany's completely ruined life. I turned my attention back to the shocked crowd of socialites. As a crisis management specialist, my entire career is built on uncovering the absolute truth when desperate people try to bury it under expensive public relations spin. And I must say, Dad, your public relations spin tonight was incredibly sloppy. You brought everyone here to publicly shame Jamal and me into handing over a helpless infant to a woman you claim is a recovering, deeply loving mother. But since you boldly brought up the sensitive subject of Brittany's exclusive wellness retreat, I think it is only fair that we show your guests exactly what kind of wellness she was actively practicing. I clicked the small remote in my hand a second time. The massive screen behind me shifted instantly from my corporate logo to a high-resolution scan of official bank records. The stark black and white numbers were blown up so large that even the elderly guests sitting in the very back row could read them perfectly. I used the laser pointer attached to my remote, circling a specific transaction time-stamped exactly 4 months ago, right in the middle of a massive winter storm. "This is a joint savings account belonging to Jamal and my sister," I announced. On the exact same day Brittany supposedly suffered her mental breakdown, she authorized an immediate wire transfer. She moved $250,000 into an untraceable offshore shell account. She liquidated her husband's life savings in minutes. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the dining hall. I did not give them a single second to process the theft before delivering the next blow. I clicked the remote again. A copy of a police report appeared on the screen, heavily redacted, but clearly showing Brittany's signature at the bottom. To bypass the bank's dual authorization security protocols for such a massive withdrawal, I explained, pacing slowly across the dais, Brittany marched into a local police precinct and filed a completely fraudulent domestic violence report against Jamal. She swore under oath that he was a violent, abusive monster who was threatening her life. She used that horrific lie to trigger an emergency financial exemption, successfully locking an innocent man out of his own bank accounts while he was sitting at his office desk. Jamal remained stoic beside me, but profound vindication shone in his eyes. The wealthy country club wives who had just been sending Brittany sympathetic glances were now staring at her in absolute horror. Filing a false police report to commit financial fraud was a massive felony. And in their elite social circles, it was the ultimate unforgivable scandal. But I was not even close to being finished. I clicked the remote a third time. The dreary black and white financial documents vanished, replaced by a vibrant, full-color spread of credit card statements and high-definition photographs. "My father told you Brittany was recovering at an exclusive, secluded wellness retreat," I said, allowing a sharp, mocking edge to finally enter my voice. According to her frozen credit card statements, that specialized medical facility was actually the Grand Velas luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. I pointed the laser at the itemized receipts. Her intensive medical treatment included $5,000 a night oceanfront suites, daily couples massages, and exorbitant amounts of vintage champagne charged to room service. The photographs on the right side were the final nail in the coffin. My investigative team tracked down her burner accounts and purchased security footage from the resort. The images clearly show Brittany lounging on a pristine beach. She was wearing a tiny designer bikini, holding a massive margarita, and laughing hysterically. She looked healthy, deeply tanned, and completely unbothered. More importantly, she was not alone. In every single photograph, she was intimately wrapped in the arms of a tall, muscular man with a deep tan and expensive sunglasses. It was a man who was very obviously not her husband. "This is the heartbreaking reality of her severe postpartum depression," I declared loudly over the chaotic whispers of the stunned crowd. She did not flee because she was overwhelmed by early motherhood. She fled to take a luxury vacation with her secret lover, using stolen money, completely free from the heavy burdens of her marriage and newborn child. The ballroom erupted. Aunt Beatrice, who had been rubbing Brittany's back just minutes ago, physically recoiled from her, as if my sister were suddenly highly contagious. A heavy crystal wine glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered loudly against the marble floor, but nobody even looked away from the damning evidence on the massive screen. Brittany stood frozen in the center of the room, her pale, tragic facade entirely destroyed. Her face flushed a deep, ugly crimson as the undeniable documented proof of her infidelity and federal crimes was broadcasted to every single person she had ever tried to impress. Patricia tried to shield Brittany's face with her hands, but the damage was already permanently done. Harrison gripped the edge of the dais, his knuckles stark white. "You hacked her accounts," he stammered weakly, his voice barely audible over the loud, furious gossip filling the room. "This is illegal." "No, Dad," I corrected him coldly, looking down at his defeated posture. "It is called legal discovery." And while she was drinking champagne in Mexico with her boyfriend, I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "Do you want to know exactly where she left her 1-month-old son?" I clicked the remote for the 4th time. The bright, sun-drenched photographs of Cabo San Lucas vanished instantly. The massive screen plunged into the stark black and white of an infrared security camera feed. In the top right corner, the timestamp flashed brightly in bold red font, 2:14 a.m., exactly 4 months ago. The high-definition microphone attached to my porch camera captured the audio perfectly. The ballroom filled with the incredibly loud howling sound of a brutal Boston winter storm. The sleet sounded like tiny stones striking the pavement. "Watch very closely," I instructed the completely silent room. This is the exact moment my sister began her courageous journey to find herself. On the massive screen, Brittany's silver sport utility vehicle sped recklessly into my icy driveway. The brakes locked slightly as she slammed them in the slick conditions. The heavy driver's side door opened, and Brittany stepped out into the freezing rain. The unedited 4K resolution left absolutely no room for interpretation. Everyone in the dining hall could clearly see her face twisted in a scowl of pure annoyance, not the tragic sorrow of a depressed mother. She was wearing a thick winter coat, protected from the cold. She walked to the back door of the vehicle and yanked it open. She reached inside and grabbed the infant car seat with one hand. A collective gasp, much louder and far more horrified than the last, echoed through the ballroom as the family watched her march briskly toward my front porch. She did not hold the carrier gently against her chest. She swung it carelessly at her side like cumbersome luggage she could not wait to discard. When she reached the concrete porch, she did not bend down to carefully place the baby in a safe spot. She practically dropped the carrier onto the freezing ground. It hit the icy concrete with a hard, sickening thud that echoed through the high-end audio system of the dining hall. Several women in the crowd actually screamed out loud. My Uncle George, a man who had never spoken a harsh word, let out a loud curse. On the screen, Brittany carelessly shoved a folded note under the plastic handle. She did not pull the thin fleece blanket up to protect her son's face from the sideways sleet. She did not hesitate, and she did not cry. She simply turned on her heel, marched rapidly back to her warm vehicle, slammed the door shut, and sped backward down the driveway. The red glow of her taillights disappeared into the dark night. I let the video continue playing for another agonizing 60 seconds. The only sound in the grand ballroom was the howling wind from the speakers and the faint, incredibly desperate cries of a freezing 1-month-old infant echoing from the abandoned car seat on the screen. It was pure, unfiltered cruelty broadcasted in high definition. "Turn it off," Aunt Beatrice sobbed loudly, burying her face in her hands. "Please, Cassidy, turn it off. It is completely unbearable." I clicked the remote, freezing the frame on the abandoned car seat. I turned to face the crowd. My sister left her newborn son to freeze to death so she could catch a morning flight to Mexico with her boyfriend. That is the undeniable truth. But what makes this situation truly unforgivable is not just what Brittany did. It is what my parents did the very next morning. The furious, disgusted eyes of every single person in the room slowly shifted away from the frozen image on the screen and locked directly onto Harrison and Patricia. "I called my parents immediately," I told the crowd, my voice ringing with clarity. They arrived at my house, looked at their abandoned, freezing grandson, and explicitly refused to help. They told me to raise him myself because taking care of a baby would ruin their perfect Sunday schedule. They willingly signed a legal waiver surrendering guardianship rights so they could play golf. They fabricated the entire wellness retreat narrative, actively lied to you, and launched a vicious public smear campaign against me just to protect their social standing. Harrison stood frozen on the dais. His face was slicked with cold sweat. Patricia tried to reach out to one of her closest country club friends standing in the front row. But the woman physically recoiled, taking 3 massive steps backward, as if my mother were entirely diseased. The elite social circle my parents had spent their entire lives worshiping and sacrificing their own children for had just turned against them completely. "You are a monster, Patricia," the woman hissed venomously, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Both of you are absolute monsters." The harsh, venomous words from the country club socialite hung heavily in the air, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Patricia stood completely frozen, her eyes darting wildly around the grand ballroom. She looked at the faces of the women she had spent decades desperately trying to impress, the women she had hosted at lavish brunches and played tennis with every single Tuesday. They were all staring back at her with unshielded disgust. The flawless public image she valued more than her own children was shattering into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her eyes. Unable to process the overwhelming social rejection, Patricia's mind violently rejected reality. She spun around and focused all of her blinding rage entirely on me. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Shut up!" Patricia shrieked at the crowd, her voice cracking wildly. Then she pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. "This is all your fault. You orchestrated this entire circus just to humiliate us. You jealous, vindictive witch. You have always wanted to destroy this family. You are completely dead to us. Get out of my sight right now, and do not you ever dare to step foot inside my house again." I stood perfectly still on the raised dais. I did not flinch at her screaming, and I did not back away. Instead, a slow, genuinely cold smile spread across my face. I reached into the sleek leather briefcase I had placed on the dais earlier and calmly unclasped the silver lock. "There is a very significant flaw in your dramatic threat, Mother," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the microphone so every single person in the silent ballroom could hear my response. "You cannot permanently ban me from a house that you do not actually own." Harrison stepped forward, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and boiling anger. "What absolute nonsense are you talking about now, Cassidy?" he barked, trying desperately to regain some shred of authority in front of his wealthy peers. "We own the Belmont estate. We have lived in that house for 25 years. It is our property." I pulled a thick, legally bound folder from my briefcase. "No, Dad, you owned the Belmont estate for 22 years. I corrected him, keeping my tone deadly calm and analytical. 3 years ago, you were secretly drowning in massive, insurmountable debt. You drained your retirement accounts and took out high-interest loans just to quietly pay off Brittany's previous legal settlements and secret credit card debts. You hid it from everyone in this room, but you could not hide it from the bank. The bank initiated a formal foreclosure process to seize the mansion." Harrison went entirely pale. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. The crowd began whispering frantically again, completely shocked to learn the wealthy patriarch was secretly broke. "You thought you were saved at the very last minute by a miraculous private investment firm called Apex Financial Holdings," I continued, pacing slowly across the stage. "They bought your foreclosed debt and offered you a restructured payment plan that allowed you to quietly stay in the mansion and keep up your pathetic facade of wealth. You enthusiastically signed the massive stack of paperwork without ever looking into who actually owned Apex Financial Holdings." I walked to the edge of the dais and looked directly down into my father's terrified eyes. "Apex Financial Holdings is a private shell corporation entirely owned and operated by Vanguard Crisis Public Relations," I declared, letting the brutal reality wash over him. I bought your foreclosed debt, Dad. I own the deed to the Belmont estate. The monthly payments you have been making for the past 3 years are not a mortgage. They are rent payments. I am your landlord. Patricia let out a loud, hysterical gasp. That is a lie, she screamed, shaking her head aggressively. That is a complete and utter lie. I pulled the official state-certified property deed from the folder and tossed it effortlessly onto the cocktail table nearest to them. The heavy parchment landed with a soft slap. You can read the notarized signatures for yourself, I offered coldly, but I was not quite finished. I reached into the folder one final time and pulled out a single, crisp sheet of white paper. Since you clearly violated the moral and behavioral clauses of our lease agreement by orchestrating a vicious public smear campaign against your landlord, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality, and since you just publicly ordered me off my own property, I think it is time we officially terminate our arrangement. I let the paper flutter down from the dais, landing perfectly right next to the property deed. That is an official, legally binding 30-day eviction notice, I announced to my parents. You have exactly 1 month to pack up your designer clothes, clear out of my house, and find somewhere else to live. The crisp white eviction notice rested perfectly still on the cocktail table beside the heavy property deed. Patricia stared down at the terrifying piece of paper, her mouth opening and closing silently, as if she had completely forgotten how to speak. The grand ballroom of the Belmont Country Club was so incredibly quiet that the clinking of ice melting in unattended glasses echoed loudly across the room. But that heavy, suffocating silence was suddenly broken by a piercing sound rapidly approaching from the street outside. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail in the distance, but within seconds, it multiplied and grew deafeningly loud. The unmistakable sound of multiple police sirens cut violently through the peaceful spring night. Slices of stark red and blue light began flashing rapidly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the dining hall, painting the shocked faces of the country club elite in harsh, alternating colors. A wave of fresh panic washed over the crowd. Guests began stepping away from my family, entirely clearing a wide path toward the grand entrance. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom were suddenly pushed wide open. 2 uniformed Boston police officers stepped inside, immediately followed by 2 stern-looking men wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed boldly across their backs. Harrison stood frozen on the raised dais, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. Patricia instinctively grabbed Brittany's arm, trying to pull her youngest daughter behind her, as if she could hide a grown woman from federal authorities in the middle of a brightly lit room. Brittany Harrison, the lead federal agent called out, his authoritative voice easily cutting through the panicked murmurs of the wealthy guests. He did not ask a question. He stated her name with absolute certainty as he marched directly down the center aisle, his eyes locked entirely on my trembling sister. Brittany pressed herself against Patricia's back, shaking uncontrollably. "Daddy, do something," she whimpered, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "Tell them to leave. Tell them this is a private event." But Harrison did not move. He did not shout orders or threaten to call the police commissioner like he normally would have. He was a completely broken man, stripped of his fake wealth and his unearned authority. He just stared blankly at the approaching federal agents. "Brittany Harrison, you are under arrest for severe federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and felony identity theft," the agent announced coldly as he stepped up to the group. He reached out, grabbed Brittany's wrist firmly, and pulled her away from my mother. Brittany screamed, thrashing wildly in her expensive silk dress, but the agent smoothly spun her around and snapped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists. The loud metallic click echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. "You have the right to remain silent," the second agent recited, reading her Miranda rights as Brittany sobbed hysterically, her carefully applied makeup running in dark streaks down her face. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Patricia lunged forward, her manicured claws extended. Get your hands off my daughter, she shrieked. You cannot arrest her. We are members of this club. One of the uniformed police officers instantly stepped into Patricia's path, resting his hand casually on his utility belt. Ma'am, I highly suggest you step back immediately, the officer warned in a low, dangerous tone, unless you want to be arrested for interfering with a federal investigation. Patricia gasped, shrinking back as if she had been physically struck. Realizing that his money was gone, his reputation was permanently destroyed, and his golden child was currently being hauled away in steel handcuffs, Harrison resorted to his absolute final desperate tactic. He clutched his chest with both hands, letting out a loud, dramatic groan. He stumbled backward, knocking over a cocktail table and sending crystal glasses shattering across the marble floor. My heart! Harrison gasped loudly, dropping heavily onto one knee and looking pleadingly toward the crowd of his wealthy, influential friends. Please, someone help me. I am having severe chest pain. Call an ambulance immediately. He breathed heavily, squeezing his eyes shut, waiting for the frantic rush of footsteps and the concerned cries of his peers. He waited for the country club manager to bring the emergency medical kit. He waited for someone, anyone, to validate his manufactured suffering. It was a pathetic, highly calculated performance designed to instantly shift the narrative and paint himself as the ultimate tragic victim. Instead, absolutely nothing happened. The wealthy business owners, the politicians, and the country club wives simply stood there and watched him with cold, detached disgust. Not a single person stepped forward to help him. Aunt Beatrice actually turned her back entirely, refusing to even look at the pathetic display. The elite society he had worshipped his entire life recognized a sinking ship, and they were actively letting him drown. A passing waiter casually set a glass of tap water on a nearby table, but that was the absolute extent of the compassion the room had left to offer. Jamal and I stood quietly on the dais, watching the spectacular collapse of his empire. We did not need to say a single word. The total silence of the room was the loudest verdict possible. The illusion of the untouchable Harrison family was officially dead and buried. Harrison remained on his hands and knees for a few more agonizing seconds. When he finally realized that absolutely no one was going to rush to his aid, his fake heavy breathing slowly stopped. He awkwardly pushed himself up from the marble floor, his face burning with a profound, inescapable shame. He dusted off his expensive tailored trousers, refusing to make eye contact with any of the wealthy investors who were now actively turning their backs on him and walking briskly toward the grand exit. The massive ballroom was rapidly emptying out. The elite socialites wanted absolutely nothing to do with a federal crime scene, and they certainly wanted nothing to do with a bankrupt family. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind the federal agents, completely cutting off Brittany's frantic, hysterical screams. The stark red and blue lights stopped flashing through the tall windows as the police cruisers pulled away from the country club entrance, taking the precious golden child straight to a federal holding cell. Patricia was left standing completely alone next to the overturned cocktail table. She looked down at the crisp white eviction notice resting perfectly next to the legal property deed. The absolute reality of her situation finally crashed down on her with the crushing, suffocating weight of a collapsing building. In less than 20 minutes, she had lost her favorite daughter to the federal penitentiary. She had lost her pristine social standing forever, and she was about to lose the multi-million-dollar mansion that served as the entire foundation of her fake identity. Her manicured hands began to tremble violently. She slowly lifted her head and looked up at me, standing on the raised dais. The vicious, hateful woman who had just screamed at me to get out of her sight was completely gone. In her place was a terrified, desperate woman who suddenly realized she had absolutely no power left. Patricia took a slow, unsteady step toward the dais, then another. When she reached the bottom of the short wooden staircase, her legs simply gave out. She collapsed heavily onto her knees, the expensive blush silk of her designer dress pooling around her on the hard floor. She looked up at me, hot tears streaming rapidly down her face, entirely destroying her perfect makeup. "Cassidy," Patricia sobbed, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoed loudly through the nearly empty dining hall. "Cassidy, please, you cannot do this to us. I am begging you. You are my dearest, eldest daughter. I carried you. I raised you. You cannot throw your own mother and father out onto the street. We have absolutely nowhere else to go. We will lose everything we have ever worked for. Please have some mercy on your family." Them a cold, unadulterated serving of the irrelevance they had subjected me to for decades, I was finally experiencing my own happily ever after. The day after the country club implosion, Leo's pediatrician, Dr. Evelyn Reed, met me and Jamal at my new home. She had examined Leo extensively since his release from the hospital and confirmed that he was, in fact, perfectly healthy and on track for normal development. She expressed her sincere condolences for the ordeal we had endured and offered her support in any way she could help. "I understand you're concerned about future legal ramifications, Ms. Vance," Dr. Reed said, placing a reassuring hand on my arm. "Vanguard Crisis Public Relations has been meticulously documenting and archiving every single one of your father's fraudulent transactions for the past decade. We uncovered evidence of a sophisticated offshore money laundering scheme that far exceeds anything Harrison has been accused of in the past. My lawyers are already in possession of all the evidence," I responded, a small smile playing on my lips. "Harrison will be facing federal charges for racketeering, money laundering, and securities fraud. The SEC has been building a case against him for years, and the evidence we provided them with will ensure he never sees the outside of a federal prison again." "That's good to hear," Dr. Reed replied softly. "And what about Brittany? Will she face any charges?" Jamal squeezed my shoulder gently. "Harrison used her as a pawn in his schemes for years," he explained. "She was an accessory to his crimes, but she was also a victim of his manipulation. She has agreed to cooperate fully with federal authorities in exchange for a plea deal that will significantly reduce her sentence." "She's looking at a maximum of 5 years," I added. "But given her cooperation and the fact that she's a first-time offender with no prior criminal record, she'll likely serve less than 2. Dr. Reed nodded, her expression softening with compassion. "That's a fair outcome. I am truly happy for both of you. You have both been through so much." "We have," Jamal agreed, his gaze meeting mine. "But we're not going back. We're only moving forward." I smiled, my heart swelling with a profound sense of peace and gratitude. Jamal was right. We had escaped the toxic clutches of the Harrison family, and we were finally free to build a life together. A life filled with genuine love, unwavering support, and the unconditional joy of watching Leo grow. The next few months blurred into a beautiful symphony of domestic bliss. Leo thrived, his laughter echoing through the halls of our beautiful new home. He was a happy, healthy child, completely unaware of the dark storm he had navigated and the courageous battle waged in his name. Jamal and I were the perfect blend of nurturing parents and devoted partners, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we build for ourselves. A year later, the harsh reality of consequence had finally settled permanently over the people who used to call themselves my family. Exactly 30 days after the country club disaster, Harrison and Patricia were forced to pack whatever meager belongings they could fit into a rented moving truck. They left the Belmont mansion, handing the keys to my corporate legal team. Because their credit was completely destroyed by massive debt and public bankruptcy, they could not secure a lease anywhere near their old neighborhood. They ended up on the far industrial outskirts of the city, moving into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a decaying brick complex that smelled permanently of damp mildew and stale cigarette smoke. The transition was absolutely brutal for them. Patricia, a woman who had once spent thousands of dollars a month on luxury skincare and designer clothing, now spent her days sitting on a cheap, peeling vinyl sofa she bought from a local thrift store. She still stubbornly wore her old pearl earrings, clinging desperately to the ghostly remnants of a social status that no longer existed. She spent hours staring at the peeling yellow wallpaper, occasionally scrolling through the social media accounts of her former country club friends. She watched from a cracked smartphone screen as the elite women she worshipped continued hosting lavish charity galas without her. Not a single person from their old life ever called to check on them. When Patricia tried to reach out, her numbers were immediately blocked. The high society circle had excised them like a malignant tumor. Harrison fared even worse. Stripped of his massive house, his fake wealth, and his intimidating public persona, he aged 10 years in a matter of months. He took a low-paying administrative job at a local auto parts distributor just to keep the lights on and pay for their basic groceries. He spent his evenings sitting silently at a wobbly laminate kitchen table, staring out the window at the cracked asphalt parking lot. He no longer barked orders. He no longer puffed out his chest to physically intimidate anyone. The arrogant patriarch who had once commanded rooms with a silver spoon and a crystal champagne flute was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated old man who finally understood that his entire life had been a pathetic illusion. The absolute worst punishment for a narcissist is not anger or revenge. It is total, suffocating irrelevance, and they were now completely invisible to the world. While my parents served them a cold, unadulterated serving of the irrelevance they had subjected me to for decades, I was finally experiencing my own happily ever after. There were no oceanfront suites or vintage champagne. Brittany traded her expensive blush silk dresses for a standard-issue, scratchy khaki uniform. In the beginning, she tried to employ her classic manipulation tactics. She attempted crying on command, playing the fragile, misunderstood victim to elicit sympathy from the prison guards and fellow inmates. However, fabricated tears hold no value within a federal facility. For the first time in her 30 years, her striking blonde hair and her manufactured sorrow couldn't secure her even a sliver of special treatment. She was compelled to rise at dawn, scrub the heavy cafeteria floors, and sit in solitude within a cold, stark concrete cell, burdened by the overwhelming weight of her decisions. Her single weekly phone call was usually to Patricia, and they would spend their 15 minutes weeping together. Two exceptionally selfish women mourning the demise of their unearned privilege. They had forfeited everything because they simply could not curb their desire for more, and because they fundamentally underestimated the quiet, invisible daughter they believed they could control indefinitely. They were utterly ensnared in prisons of their own design, both tangible and figurative. Meanwhile, miles removed from their misery, the sun shone brilliantly upon the life I had constructed from the remnants of their ruin. The stark contrast between their dark, isolated reality and the vibrant, loving home Jamal and I had cultivated was profound. We didn't spend our days fixated on the ruins behind us. We were far too occupied looking ahead towards our bright future. We had a beautiful son to raise, demanding careers to navigate, and a substantial fortune to enjoy together, unburdened by any toxic shadows that might loom heavily over us. 2 full years have elapsed since the night the Harrison family empire officially crumbled. I am presently seated in my expansive corner office at Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. The floor-to-ceiling windows provide a breathtaking panorama of the Boston skyline, bathed in the golden light of a Tuesday afternoon. My desk is strewn with corporate contracts. Yet, my favorite element of this room is the small, brightly colored playmat neatly tucked into a corner. It serves as a constant reminder of precisely why I fought so arduously to build this life. The heavy glass door to my office suddenly swings open. I glance up from my laptop and instantly break into an enormous smile. Standing in the doorway is Jamal, holding the hand of a vibrant, fiercely energetic 3-year-old boy. Leo is no longer the fragile infant I discovered abandoned on my icy doorstep. He is a healthy, laughing toddler with his father's bright eyes and an entirely fearless spirit. He releases Jamal's hand and immediately sprints across the plush carpet, his little sneakers padding happily against the floor. "Auntie Cassidy!" Leo cheers loudly, launching himself directly into my arms. I catch him effortlessly, lifting him and resting him on my hip. I press a kiss to his forehead, inhaling the sweet fragrance of his baby shampoo. He wraps his small arms tightly around my neck. Jamal walks in behind him, taking a seat on the leather sofa opposite my desk. Jamal appears incredibly rested and genuinely content. He utilized his substantial intellectual property settlement to establish his own boutique data analytics firm and is thriving both professionally and personally. "We are heading down to the park by the harbor," Jamal says, his voice imbued with that deep, familiar warmth. "We wanted to see if you wish to escape corporate America for an hour to feed the ducks with us." I gaze at the two of them, my heart swelling with profound gratitude. Jamal and I never forced a conventional romantic relationship to simplify things for the outside world's comprehension. We did not require a marriage certificate to validate our unwavering commitment to this child. We forged an unbreakable partnership rooted in absolute mutual respect, a shared history of surviving betrayal, and a fierce love for the boy who united us. We are an unconventional family, but we are precisely the family we were always destined to be. I reach for my coat and purse, prepared to depart my billion-dollar firm for an afternoon in the park. But before I exit the door, I turn to face you directly. I wish to take a moment to speak to anyone listening to this narrative who feels ensnared in the identical dark, suffocating shadow I inhabited for 35 years. Throughout my entire existence, I held the belief that family was an inescapable life sentence. I was convinced that because we shared the same blood, I was perpetually obliged to endure their emotional abuse, their relentless manipulation, and their cruel favoritism. Society continually implores us to forgive and forget, irrespective of the depth to which our relatives devastate our mental well-being. But I stand before you today to declare that this is an absolute falsehood. Blood does not grant anyone carte blanche to treat you as collateral damage. You owe no allegiance to individuals who only value you when they require someone to rectify their toxic predicaments. At times, the most potent and terrifying action you can undertake is simply to withdraw from the company where respect is no longer being offered. Establishing ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When you finally cease infusing all your precious energy into people who actively drain you, you create the essential space for genuine, unconditional love to enter your life. Have you ever been compelled to distance yourself from a toxic family member to safeguard your own peace? Have you ever constructed a beautiful, unconventional family of your own after experiencing abandonment by those who were meant to love you? I would absolutely cherish hearing your personal accounts of triumph and resilience in the comments section below. Kindly press the like button and subscribe to this channel if my journey resonated with you today. Share this video with anyone who might be grappling with a toxic family dynamic and requires a firm reminder that they possess the absolute power to rewrite their own story. Thank you profoundly for watching, and remember, the greatest revenge is simply living a massively successful, profoundly happy life without them. The remarkable journey we have just witnessed imparts a profound and essential lesson regarding the true definition of family. For generations, society has propagated the narrative that blood is thicker than water, implying that we must endure endless manipulation, emotional abuse, and disrespect solely because we share DNA with our abusers. However, this narrative shatters that detrimental illusion, demonstrating that biological ties do not grant anyone a license to treat you as collateral damage. The most empowering takeaway is that establishing firm, unyielding boundaries with toxic relatives is not an act of cruelty or selfishness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. For 35 years, the protagonist was treated as an invisible burden, expected to absorb the failures of the golden child and cater to the narcissistic demands of her parents. Yet, the moment she recognized her own worth and ceased seeking their conditional validation, she stripped them of all their power. Furthermore, we learn that family is not solely something one is born into. It is something that can be actively chosen and created. By stepping forward to protect a vulnerable infant and forging an alliance built on mutual respect with another who had been discarded, she constructed a beautiful, authentic home. True family members are those who fiercely protect your peace, stand by your side through the darkest storms, and celebrate your power rather than attempting to diminish it. Sometimes, walking away from the table where love is no longer being served is the absolute best way to finally discover the peace you genuinely deserve. If you have ever had to step away from a toxic situation to safeguard your own peace, please share your story in the comments below and subscribe to join a community that celebrates healing and resilience.